The hegemony's scout ships materialized at the edge of Sol's system like poisonous flowers, blooming in the void. Admiral Korvik's Malthus studied the tactical display from his flagship's command throne, mandibles clicking in satisfaction. 37. Civilizations had fallen before the hegemony's might, their world stripped bare, their populations enslaved or harvested. Earth would be the 38th. Energy readings. Sub-Commander Vextel, Malthus' voice resonated through the bridges. Chitinous walls, primitive fusion signatures. Admiral. Their defensive grid appears, quaint. 3 orbital stations, basic particle shields, chemical propulsion vessels. Vextel's secondary arms danced over bioluminescent controls. The humans had managed barely to centuries of spaceflight. They posed no threat. Malthus' laugh was like grinding stone. The humans had sent desperate transmissions offers of surrender, pleas for negotiation, even pathetic attempts at bribery. All ignored. The hegemony took what it wanted, when it wanted: resources, territory, genetic material. Everything had value, except mercy. Deep within Luna's reinforced command bunker, Director Kashin Volkov watched the alien fleet through feeds. From the outer sensor rays, 47 ships of unknown configuration hung like vultures beyond Neptune's orbit. His weathered hands trembled as he reached for the secured communication link. Phoenix Protocol is authorized. He spoke into the quantum encrypted channel. All deep space assets, maintain radio silence. Begin Phase 1 positioning. Around the solar system, seemingly empty patches of space began to stir. Cloak manufacturing platforms that had been building in secret for 15 years powered down their stealth systems just long enough to release their cargo. Thousands of automated drones, no larger than coffins, drifted into predetermined positions. The humans had learned hard lessons from their own history. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to prepare for the most terrible war imaginable. Captain Elena Vasquez floated in the cramped cockpit of her stealth fighter, one of the few manned vessels still hidden among Earth's defensive perimeter. Her squadron, the Ghosts, had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The aliens' technology was clearly superior, but humans had one advantage their enemies couldn't comprehend. They were absolutely, magnificently insane when cornered. Ghost leader to all units, she whispered into her comm, remember what they did to Kepler for to be. 3 billion people, no survivors, no prisoners, just gone. The footage from humanity's furthest colonies still haunted the collective consciousness. An entire world reduced to molten slag, its population harvested for biological experiments. The few escape pods that survived carried recordings of the aliens' methods, slow, methodical, creative in their cruelty. Admiral Malthus' fleet began its approach to Earth, confident and unhurried. Their ships were living things, bred for war, armored with bioceramic composites that could regenerate from damage. Weapon symbiotes pulsed along their hulls, eager to feed on enemy vessels. The organic computers calculated optimal harvesting strategies for Earth's population, which specimens to preserve for breeding, which to process for biomass, which to keep for entertainment. Begin long-range bombardment, Malthus commanded. Target their orbital installations first. I want their shields down before we enter close combat range. The first wave of bioplasma bolts streaked across the void, each one capable of melting through a kilometer of steel. They struck Earth's shields and held. The energy barriers flared but didn't collapse, fed by power sources hidden deep in the planet's crust. Vextel's stalked eyes widened. Admiral, their shields are stronger than anticipated. Power output suggests they're drawing from their planet's core. Irrelevant. Increased bombardment intensity. No primitive species has ever withstood the hegemony's full might. But as the alien barrage intensified, something else was happening in the depths of space. Hidden shipyards that had operated in the shadow of asteroids for decades began opening their doors. Automated factories that had consumed entire moons to feed their production lines finally revealed their purpose. And in the deepest bunkers of Earth, Luna, and Mars, ancient weapon systems, some theoretical, some forbidden, all terrifying, hummed to life. The humans had spent generations preparing for this moment, driven by the knowledge that somewhere, in the darkness between stars, things existed that would show no mercy to a young, weak species trying to find its place in the galaxy. They were about to learn that humanity had never been weak, only patient. The hegemony's bombardment had been pounding Earth shields for 6 hours when the first surprise revealed itself. Admiral Malthus' confidence began to waver as his bioplasma cannons failed to penetrate the planet's defenses. Worse, the energy readings suggested the shields were actually growing stronger. Impossible, Vexel chittered, secondary arms working frantically at the tactical displays. Their power output has increased by 40%. No known technology can. The sub-commander's words died as space around the hegemony fleet suddenly erupted in violence. What had appeared to be empty void now swarmed with thousands of small craft, each no larger than a fighter, but moving with inhuman precision. They emerged from stealth like deadly ghosts, their black holes seeming to absorb light itself. Ambush, Malthor roared, his mandibles flaring. All ships, defensive formations. Target those vermin, but the human drones weren't attacking the main fleet. Instead, they swarmed toward the hegemony's support vessels, the biorefineries and harvesting ships that followed every conquering fleet. The first drone reached the tender flesh render and did something impossible. It phased through the ship's shields as if they didn't exist. The explosion that followed vaporized 3 square kilometers of living hull. Then another drone hit, and another. The flesh render began to list, its bioneural network screaming in agony as critical systems failed. How are they penetrating our shields? Malthor demanded. Captain Elena Vasquez smiled grimly as she watched the battle unfold from her hidden position. The drones weren't just using conventional explosives, each one carried a microsingularity generator, a weapon so dangerous that its development had been banned by 3 separate Earth governments. But desperate times had a way of making monsters of even the most civilized species. Ghost leader to Phoenix Command, she transmitted on the secured channel. Phase 1 successful. Enemy support ships taking heavy casualties. Initiating Phase 2 across the solar system. More secrets revealed themselves. What the aliens had identified as primitive fusion signatures were actually the exhaust from humanity's newest warships, vessels that had been hiding in plain sight, disguised as cargo haulers and mining platforms. Now they shed their camouflage and accelerated toward the hegemony fleet at velocities that should have turned their crews to paste. The UES Retribution was the first to enter weapons range, its quantum-entangled armor plating shifting from matte black to mirror bright as it prepared for battle. Captain Marcus Draven sat in his command chair, feeling the ship's artificial gravity compensators strain against 15 Gs of acceleration. All weapons, maximum dispersion pattern, he ordered. Let's show these bastards what human ingenuity looks like when we stop playing nice. The Retribution's main guns were humanity's answer to the alien bioceramic armor. Molecular disruptors that didn't just destroy matter, they convinced it to stop existing. The first salvo struck the hegemony cruiser Bone Harvest amidships, and where the beams touched, reality simply ended. A perfect sphere of nothingness appeared in the alien vessel's hull, expanding slowly but inexorably. By the void, Malthor whispered, watching his ship die in a way that violated every natural law he understood. What manner of beings are these humans? Vexel's response was cut short as another human weapon revealed itself. The seemingly empty space near Jupiter began to ripple, and then a structure emerged that dwarfed even the largest hegemony vessels. It was a shipyard, but not one built for construction. This was a weapons platform the size of a small moon, its surface bristling with cannon batteries that could crack planets. Admiral, the communications specialist's voice quavered. We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. On screen, Malthor snarled. Director Volkov's face appeared, his expression calm despite the carnage surrounding his world. Hegemony forces, you have entered Sol System without permission and committed acts of war against the Terran Federation. You have one opportunity to withdraw. Take it. Malthor's laughter filled the bridge. Your species hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. Primitive. What could you possibly do to threaten the hegemony? Volkov's smile was colder than the void between stars. We've had 15 years to study the wreckage from Kepler for 2b. 15 years to reverse engineer your technology, improve upon it, and develop counters for everything in your arsenal. Did you really think you were the only ones capable of learning? The director's image flickered and changed, showing tactical displays of the battle. Your fleet composition follows standard hegemony doctrine: heavy assault ships, biorefineries, and harvesting platforms protected by a screen of escorts. Your weapons rely on bioplasma that becomes unstable when exposed to specific quantum frequencies. Your armor regenerates using a bacterial symbiosis that dies when the temperature drops below absolute zero. With each revelation, Malthor felt his certainty crumble. The humans knew too much, planned too well. This wasn't the desperate flailing of a primitive species, this was a trap. laid with the patience of predators who understood that the hunter could become the hunted. "Your move, Admiral," Volkov said quietly. "Choose wisely. It will likely be your last choice." As if summoned by his words, the first of Earth's hidden battle fleets emerged from the asteroid belt, their hulls gleaming with weapons that had never been tested in combat but had been perfected through decades of terrible imagination. Admiral Malther's first instinct was to retreat, but pride and protocol demanded otherwise. The hegemony had never withdrawn from a primitive system, never shown weakness to an inferior species. To do so now would invite rebellion across 37 conquered worlds. "All ships, attack formation Gamma 7, he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "Target their largest platforms first. Show these mammals what happens when they bare fangs at their betters." The hegemony fleet surged forward like a tide of living metal and bone. Their bioships pulsed with bioluminescent war patterns, weapon symbiotes swelling with anticipation. The sight should have been terrifying, and it was, to every human who witnessed it. But terror, they had learned, was just another fuel for the fire of human ingenuity. Captain Draven watched the alien advance from the bridge of the Retribution, his knuckles white on the armrest of his command chair. "All ships, execute Lazarus. Protocol. Authorization Delta 77. Across the human fleet." Captains received the most dreaded order in their tactical manual. Lazarus Protocol meant accepting certain death to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. It meant turning their ships into weapons so terrible that their own crews couldn't survive their deployment. The first ship to execute was the destroyer Thermopylae. Captained by Commander Liu Xian, she ordered her crew to the escape pods, then manually overrode the safety systems on her ship's antimatter containment field. As the hegemony cruiser Marrow Drinker closed within weapons range, the Thermopylae detonated with the force of a small star. The explosion vaporized both ships instantly, but its secondary effects were far worse for the aliens. The antimatter annihilation created a cascade of quantum disruptions that spread through the bioneural networks linking the hegemony fleet. 3 more alien ships lost motor control, drifting helplessly as their nervous systems fired random signals. "Fascinating," Vextel observed, even as alarms shrieked around him. "They're weaponizing their own deaths." The psychological profiles suggested humans feared extinction above all else. "The profiles were wrong," Malther growled. "Signal the reserve fleet. All ships. Emergency translation. We need reinforcements." But as the hegemony's FTL communications array powered up, it encountered another surprise. The space-around Sol system had been seeded with quantum mines devices that existed in a state of superposition until activated by specific energy signatures. When the alien communication system tried to punch through dimensional barriers, it instead triggered a cascade of explosions that severed their connection to the greater hegemony. Director Volkov watched the battle from Luna Command, his face illuminated by displays showing casualty reports. Humanity was bleeding. Each Lazarus Protocol execution took a ship and its crew out of the fight permanently, but the aliens were suffering worse. Their bioships unable to adapt quickly enough to weapons that violated their understanding of physics, sir, reported Colonel Yuki Tanaka, his tactical officer. Ghost Squadron reports successful penetration of the enemy's inner defense screen. Captain Vasquez is requesting permission to begin her attack run. Volkov closed his eyes for a moment. Elena Vasquez had volunteered for the mission everyone knew was suicide, a direct assault on the hegemony flagship using humanity's most dangerous prototype weapon. The null cannon could theoretically punch through any defense, but its test firings had killed every pilot who attempted to use it. "Permission granted," he said quietly. Tell her humanity won't forget." High above Earth's atmosphere, Captain Vasquez felt her fighter's hull vibrate as the null cannon began its charging sequence. The weapon drew power directly from quantum vacuum fluctuations, turning the empty space between atoms into a conduit for destruction. The process was slowly tearing her ship apart, but it would last long enough. "Ghost leader to all units," she transmitted. "It's been an honor flying with you. Give them hell." Her squadron, the 12 survivors of the original 48, formed up around her as she dove toward the hegemony flagship. Alien point defense systems opened fire. Bioplasma bolts that could melt tungsten passing close enough to her cockpit that she could feel their heat through the canopy. 2 of her wingmen died in the first exchange, their fighters simply ceasing to exist as they flew into concentrated fire. Then 3 more, their stealth systems overloaded by the sheer volume of energy weapons tracking them. But the remaining ghosts pressed on, their own weapons carving paths of destruction through the alien ship's defensive arrays. Aboard the Death Song, Admiral Malther felt his flagship shudder as human fighters carved through its living hull. The bioship's pain receptors flooded his command throne with agony, sharing the vessel's suffering with its commander. But through the pain, he saw something that chilled him more than any weapon. The lead human fighter was glowing, not with fire or plasma, but with something far more fundamental, a light of reality being torn apart and rewoven. As he watched, the small craft became a streak of impossible brightness heading directly for his bridge. All hands, brace for, he began. The no cannon fired. The beam that emerged from Vasquez's fighter wasn't light or energy as either species understood it. It was pure negation, a focused stream of non-existence that carved through the Death Song's shields, armor, and superstructure without slowing. It passed through the Admiral's command chamber, missing Malther by mere meters, and continued through the entire length of the ship before dissipating in the void beyond. The damage wasn't immediately visible. Then, slowly, the edges of the hull began to expand as the weapon's effects propagated through the flagship's bioneural network. The Death Song was dying, not from injury, but from the sudden certainty that parts of it had never existed at all. Vasquez's fighter, its hull now glowing, white-hot from quantum stress, tumbled away from the alien flagship. Her last transmission was barely audible through the static. Target confirmed. Package delivered. Phoenix, actual, the Ghost Leader's sacrifice had crippled the hegemony's command ship. But the battle was far from over. If anything, the aliens' response to their admiral's near death would be even more vicious. Malther, pulled from the wreckage of his command chamber, looked upon the human homeworld with new understanding. These weren't primitive mammals to be harvested and processed. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to make art from warfare and poetry from destruction. The hegemony was about to learn why that made them the most terrifying enemy in the galaxy. The Death Song listed through space, its bioneural network screaming in harmonic agony as the null cannon's effects spread through its living systems. Admiral Malther, his carapace cracked and leaking ichor, hauled himself from the wreckage of his command throne to the secondary control cluster. Damage report, he barked, his mandibles clicking erratically from shock. Vexel's secondary arms trembled as he interfaced with the dying ship systems. Admiral, we've lost 40% of our neural pathways. The weapon didn't just destroy matter, it convinced sections of our ship that they never existed. Our bioregeneration systems can't repair something that was never there. Around the fleet, other hegemony ships reported similar impossible damage. The human weapons defied every law of physics the aliens understood, turning their greatest advantage, their living ship's ability to heal, into a weakness as confused. Biological systems tried to regenerate from wounds that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. Malther's rage crystallized into something colder and more focused. New standing orders to all ships: no more surgical strikes, full planetary bombardment protocols. If we cannot harvest this world, we will sterilize it. The tactical shift was immediate and brutal. Bioplasma cannons that had been targeting military installations now swiveled toward population centers. Organic missile pods split open like diseased flowers, releasing swarms of self-guided warheads toward Earth's major cities. Director Volkov watched the change in alien tactics from Luna Command, his face carved from stone. Colonel Tanaka, status of the Aegis network, orbital defense platforms are holding, sir, but they're taking massive damage. Detroit Station just went dark, and Mumbai platform is down to 15% power. If they maintain this bombardment intensity, our shields will fail within the hour. Volkov nodded grimly. The aliens had finally understood what they were facing, not a primitive species to be conquered, but a mature predator that had been preparing for this fight longer than they realized. The gloves were off on both sides now. Initiate Damocles protocol, he ordered. All deep space assets, immediate activation, authorization Alpha Prime 1. Across the solar system, humanity's most carefully guarded secret began to reveal itself. Hidden among the asteroid belt, camouflaged as mining operations and research stations, were the Sword Garden's automated weapons platforms that had been consuming entire asteroids for decades, turning raw matter into instruments of war. The first to activate was Station Omega-7, built inside the hollowed-out core of the asteroid Vesta. Its surface split like an opening flower, revealing launch bays that stretched for kilometers into the rock. From these bays emerged humanity's answer to the hegemony's numbers advantage, the Valkyria swarm. Each Valkyria was barely larger than a human torso, but they were packed with technology that represented centuries of theoretical physics made manifest. They moved not through space but around it, using localized gravity wells to skip between positions like stones across a pond. And they carried payloads that made the micro-singularity weapons look gentle by comparison. Captain Marcus Draven, now commanding the human fleet from the heavy cruiser Nemesis after the Retribution sacrifice, watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. All ships, new formation, Draven Pattern 7. We're going to give these bastards a lesson in human mathematics. The Nemesis and her sister ships began a complex dance through the battle space, their movements seemingly random, but following equations that had been refined through quantum modeling. Each ship's position was calculated to create resonance patterns in the local space-time, turning the entire battlefield into a weapon. Aboard the listing death song, Vexel suddenly straightened, his stalked eyes widening in alarm. Admiral, the humans' movement patterns, they're not tactical maneuvers. They're creating a standing wave in the quantum foam if they complete the formation. Malthor didn't need his sub-commander to finish. He had seen worlds die to weapons. That rewrote the fundamental constants of reality. All ships, emergency scatter pattern, break engagement, and withdraw to. The Valkyria swarm reached the hegemony fleet. Before he could complete the order, the first drones to arrive simply phased out of existence. Their mission complete the moment they appeared, where they had been. Tiny tiers of space-time began to widen, each one no larger than a marble, but growing exponentially. The hegemony escort flesh tier was caught in the expansion field of one such tier. As the dimensional wound widened, sections of the bioship began to stretch and distort, its molecular structure pulled apart by gravitational forces that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The crew's final screams were Doppler shifted into ultrasonic frequencies as they were compressed into singularities no larger than atoms. "Void take us all," Malthor whispered, watching his fleet die in ways that violated every understanding of how death was supposed to work. What manner of species weaponizes mathematics itself? The answer came from an unexpected source. Director. Volkov's face appeared on the alien flagship's communication screens, somehow bypassing every security protocol that hegemony possessed. "You asked what we could do to threaten you," Volkov said calmly, his image unwavering despite the chaos around him. "We are a species that discovered nuclear fusion by trying to understand why the sun shines. We split the atom because we were curious about what matter was made of. We bent space-time into a weapon because we wanted to know if it was possible." Behind him, displays showed the battle in real time. Hegemony's ships were dying not from conventional weapons, but from applied physics, their destruction following mathematical principles that treated matter and energy as variables in an equation, rather than fundamental constants. "You see destruction," Volkov continued. "We see elegant solutions to interesting problems. Every weapon we've used against you was originally developed for peaceful research. We're not a warrior species, Admiral. We're worse. We're engineers who've learned to be creative with our fears." The Valkyria swarm reached the death song, and Admiral Malthor felt his flagship begin to come apart at the molecular level. Through the pain-sharing link with his dying ship, he experienced what it felt like to have reality edited around him. His consciousness stretched across dimensions that shouldn't exist. In his final moments of clarity, he understood the terrible truth about humanity. They weren't conquerors or warriors or even particularly violent by galactic standards. They were the species that had looked into the abyss of an uncaring universe and decided to install lighting. The death song collapsed into a point of infinite density and then exploded outward. As a new star, its biomass converted to pure energy by equations that treated the difference between matter and light as a clerical error to be corrected. But the hegemony fleet, shattered as it was, wasn't finished, and in the deepest bunkers of their conquered worlds, something else was stirring reinforcements that would make this battle look like a minor skirmish. The death of Admiral Malthor sent shockwaves through the hegemony's binaural command network, but it also triggered something far worse than individual rage collective response protocols that had evolved over millions of years of conquest across 37 enslaved worlds. Dormant bioships began awakening from their slumber in orbital graveyards. Sub-Admiral Kethfer, commanding from the heavy assault ship Soul Render, felt the network's collective consciousness flood through his command throne. The voice of the hegemony itself spoke through him, carrying the accumulated fury of a species that had never known defeat by the ancient void. He whispered, his carapace darkening to war black. The humans will burn for this blasphemy. Dimensional rifts began tearing open throughout the outer solar system as the hegemony's real fleet translated from fold space. These weren't the exploratory vessels that had first entered Sol. These were the harvest armadas, bioships the size of cities that had cracked worlds and devoured entire star systems. Director Volkov watched the tactical displays from Luna Command as space itself seemed to vomit forth an endless stream of alien vessels. The numbers were staggering: 300 capital ships, thousands of escorts, and bioforms so massive they registered on gravitational sensors as minor planetoids. Colonel Tanaka, he said quietly, execute protocol Samson, all authorization, codes, all restrictions lifted. We're going full mutually assured destruction. Tanaka's hands hesitated over the controls. Protocol Samson meant activating weapons that could crack moons, turning Sol system into a graveyard that would be uninhabitable for millennia. Sir, the civilian populations are already dead if we lose this fight, Volkov finished. The hegemony doesn't take prisoners. You've seen the reports from Kepler 442b. The colonel's finger stabbed down on the authorization key. Throughout the solar system, weapons that had been theoretical nightmares in university physics departments suddenly became very real. Mercury Station, built inside the solar system's innermost planet, began channeling the sun's fusion energy directly into a coherent beam that could sterilize worlds. The asteroid belt itself started to move as hidden gravitational manipulators turned each rocky body into a kinetic impactor traveling at relativistic speeds. But the humans weren't the only ones escalating. The hegemony's harvest armadas brought weapons that had ended civilizations, bioships that could reproduce themselves by consuming stellar matter, and worst of all, the renders. The first render emerged from the dimensional rift like a living nightmare. It was barely ship-shaped, more of a biological weapon platform the size of Manhattan, its hull crawling with symbiotic weapon systems that pulsed with their own malevolent intelligence. Where conventional ships fired projectiles or energy beams, renders attacked reality itself, using bioengineered parasites that could infect matter at the quantum level. Captain Elena Santos, commanding the battleship Vendetta after Captain Draven's death in the previous engagement, watched the alien monster approach through her tactical display. Her ship was one of humanity's newest designs, its hull composed of programmable matter that could reconfigure itself mid-battle. But she wasn't sure if even that would be enough. All batteries. Load Getter Demmering rounds, she ordered. If we're going down, we're taking these bastards with us. The Getter Demmering projectiles were humanity's most extreme kinetic weapon, tungsten rods, the size of telephone poles, accelerated to 90% of light speed by linear accelerators that ran the entire length of her ship. At those velocities, they carried more energy than some stellar phenomena, and they were completely invisible until impact. The Vendetta fired its full salvo at the approaching render, 60 projectiles that turned space into a tunnel of relativistic destruction. The alien bioship shields flared as the first round struck. Then the second volley punched through its defenses like they weren't there. The render's hull exploded in gouts of bioluminescent ichor, but impossibly, it kept coming. What does it take to kill these things? Santos muttered, watching as the alien vessel's wounds began to seal themselves with new tissue. That looked somehow wrong, as if it existed in too many dimensions at once. Her answer came from an unexpected source. Chief Engineer Petrov, working frantically in the Vendetta's reactor core, had discovered that the render's bioarmor was actually a form of condensed space-time matter that had been compressed beyond normal dimensional boundaries. But that also meant it was vulnerable to temporal weapons. Captain, Petrov's voice crackled over the intercom. I can reconfigure our quantum torpedo warheads to create chronoton cascades. It'll age their armor to dust in microseconds, but it'll also make our torpedoes unstable. Very unstable, sir. If one of these things goes off in our launch bay, do it. Santos ordered without hesitation. Low temporal torpedoes, all tubes. Time on target barrage, everything we've got. The Vendetta's torpedo tubes opened like the mouths of hungry beasts, releasing a spread of weapons that flickered in and out of existence as they crossed the distance to their target. Each warhead carried a bubble of accelerated time, and when they struck the render simultaneously, the result was spectacular. The alien bioship aged 10,000 years in the space of a heartbeat. Its living armor crumbled to dust. Its weapon, symbiotes, withered and died, and its bioneural networks collapsed as millennia of entropy were compressed into an instant. The render died not from violence, but from time itself. Its own biology turned against it by weapons that treated causality as another engineering problem to be solved. But humanity's victory was short-lived. For every render that died, two more emerged from the dimensional rifts, and worse, the hegemony's true weapons were only now beginning to deploy. Bioships the size of asteroids began releasing clouds of microscopic organisms into space. Nanoscale predators designed to consume any matter they encountered and replicate exponentially. These clouds spread through the vacuum like metallic fog, turning every piece of space debris into more of themselves. The human orbital stations began to die, not from direct attack, but from being literally eaten alive by organisms so small to target with conventional weapons. Mobile platform sent its final transmission as its hull simply dissolved around its crew. This is Station Commander Walsh. The gray goo is in the HAB modules. It's, oh God, it's in the air recycling. Tell Earth we held as long as we. The transmission ended its static as mobile platform became a cloud of self-replicating machinery. Its crew and equipment converted to more weapon organisms that immediately began seeking new targets. Colonel Tanaka watched the tactical display with growing horror. Sir, we're losing everything in orbital space. The nanoswarms are converting our own defenses into more weapon platforms. At this rate, they'll reach Earth's atmosphere within the hour. Volkov's response was quiet, but firm. Release the cleaners. Even Tanaka paled at those words. The cleaners were humanity's own gray goo weapon, designed as a last resort against exactly this scenario. They were nanomachines programmed to seek out and destroy anything that wasn't coated with human DNA markers, including other nanomachines. But once released, there was no guaranteeing they could be controlled or recalled. Sir, if the cleaners mutate or their targeting parameters drift, then we die as a species instead of as individuals. Volkov said simply, launch them. The cleaners deployed from hidden caches throughout the solar system. Microscopic machines that looked almost identical to the hegemony's weapon organisms. But where the alien nanoswarms consumed randomly, the cleaners were surgical, programmed with encyclopedia entries worth of data about human technology and biology. The battle that followed was invisible to human eyes, but devastating in scope. Quadrillions of microscopic machines fought each other in the vacuum of space, each side trying to convert the other into more of itself. Where the two clouds met, reality itself seemed to boil as matter was consumed, converted, and reconverted, in cycles too rapid for human comprehension. Through it all, the larger battle continued. Human ships died in brilliant flashes of nuclear fire, their crews incinerated by bioplasma weapons or torn apart by gravitational anomalies. Alien bioships withered under temporal attacks, or were compressed into singularities by dimensional weapons. The space around Earth became a graveyard of both species' finest warriors. Captain Santos watched her tactical display as the Vendetta's sister ship Righteous Fury was caught between two renders and simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. Not destroyed, but edited out of reality by weapons that treated existence as a database entry to be deleted. All remaining ships, she transmitted on the emergency frequency, fall back to Luna. We make our stand there. But even as the human fleet retreated, both sides knew this was far from over. The real battle, the one that would determine the fate of both species, was only just beginning. The war had become something beyond conquest or defense. It was evolution in action. To species discovering which one was better adapted to survive. In a universe that demanded only one thing from its inhabitants: the willingness to do absolutely anything to continue existing. The retreat to Luna was a fighting withdrawal that cost humanity half its remaining fleet. The hegemony's renders, pursued like cancer-given form, their bioweapon systems adapted to every countermeasure the humans deployed. Space around Earth's moon became a debris field of shattered vessels and cooling plasma. Captain Santos brought the Vendetta into Luna's shadow. Just as her ship's reactor began showing critical stress fractures, her chief engineer's temporal weapon modifications had pushed their power systems beyond safe parameters. But safety had become a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Lunar Command, this is Captain Santos requesting immediate docking. She transmitted. We have wounded aboard, and our reactor's going critical. Director Volkov's voice came back immediately. Negative, Captain. Luna Station is evacuating all personnel to the deep bunkers. We're implementing Getter Demering Final. Santos felt her blood turn to ice. Getter Demering Final was the last entry in humanity's tactical playbook. Turning Luna itself into a weapon, it meant sacrificing the moon to create a weapon capable of sterilizing entire solar systems, sir. The civilian population is already dead if we don't stop these things here. Volkov replied grimly. The nanoswarm clouds are reaching Earth's outer atmosphere. Our cleaners are holding them back, but barely. If the hegemony gets a foothold on the surface, it's over for everyone. Deep within Luna's core, machinery that had been built in absolute secrecy over 3 decades began its final sequence. The moon's natural structure had been hollowed out and replaced with the largest fusion reactor ever constructed by human hands, not for power generation, but for a single, catastrophic discharge that would turn Luna into a directed energy weapon, capable of cracking worlds. Sub-Admiral Keffer watched the human retreat from the command deck of his flagship Soul Render, but something about their movements troubled him. The humans weren't fleeing in panic, they were positioning themselves. With the same mathematical precision they'd shown throughout the battle, Sub-Commander Vextel, he commanded, analysis of human ship positions. Vextel's multiple arms worked frantically at his displays. Admiral, they're forming a spherical formation around their moon. Energy readings are impossible, sir. Their lunar installations are drawing power from the planetary core itself. Before Keffer could respond, Luna began to glow, not with reflected sunlight, but with the harsh radiance of stellar fusion. As the moon's hidden reactor reached critical mass, the lunar surface cracked like an eggshell, revealing the mechanical infrastructure hidden beneath fusion chambers the size of cities. Magnetic field generators that could reshape local spacetime, and at the center of it all, a weapon that violated every treaty humanity had ever signed with itself, all ships. Emergency evasion, Keffer roared, but he knew it was too late. The humans had turned their moon into a gun pointed at his fleet. The Luna cannon fired. The beam that emerged from the moon's core wasn't merely energy, it was compressed starlight. Fusion fire given direction and purpose. It struck the hegemony formation like the wrath of an angry god, vaporizing the first line of renders instantly, and continuing through the fleet with undiminished fury. The Soul Render took a glancing hit that sheared away half its biomass. Keffer, feeling his ship's agony through the neural link as sections of living hulls simply ceased to exist. Around him, other bioships died in ways the creators had never imagined possible. Their organic matter unable to withstand temperatures found only in stellar cores. But the Luna cannon's discharge had a cost. The moon itself began to tear apart, its structural integrity compromised by the enormous energies channeling through its core. Great chunks of lunar rock were flung into space, each one a potential extinction-level impact for any world unfortunate enough to be in there. Path Dock Captain Santos watched Luna die from the bridge of the Vendetta, her ship's hull glowing cherry red from the weapon's thermal backwash. All ships, fall back to Earth's gravity well. Use the planet's magnetic field for cover. The surviving human vessels, fewer than a dozen, now limped toward Earth. As Luna collapsed behind them, the moon's destruction created a temporary nebula of superheated gas and molten rock that bought them precious minutes. But the hegemony fleet was already reforming on Earth's surface. Civilian populations huddled in deep shelters as the battle raged overhead. In New Geneva, Dr. Amara Okafor worked frantically in her laboratory, putting the finishing touches on humanity's final gambit. The weapon she was preparing had been developed in violation of every ethical standard her profession possessed, but ethics were a luxury for species that had the option of survival. Director Volkov, she transmitted to Luna Command, the Genesis device is ready for deployment. But sir, once we activate it, there's no going back. The changes will be permanent, possibly irreversible. Volkov's voice was hollow with exhaustion and grief. Doctor, we've already crossed every line we swore we'd never cross. What's one more? The Genesis device was humanity's most terrible creation, a weapon that didn't destroy matter, but convinced it to become something else. Based on the same principles as their dimensional weapons, it could rewrite the fundamental constants of physics within a localized area. The plan was to use it to make the space around Earth uninhabitable to the hegemony's bioships, but the side effects were unpredictable. Sub-Admiral Keffer regrouped his shattered fleet around the largest surviving Render, a bioship designated world eater that was more weapon than vessel. Its hull crawled with adaptive armor that learned from each attack, and its central weapon system could crack continental plates with focused gravitational waves. "Signal all remaining ships," he commanded. "We end this now. Full planetary bombardment. All weapons. Reduce their world to cooling magma." The hegemony's remaining forces, still numbering in the hundreds, despite their losses, began their final approach to Earth. Their bioweapons charged with malevolent energy. Gravitational lenses focus on population centers and nanoswarm pods prepared to release clouds of world-eating organisms into the planet's atmosphere. But as they crossed the threshold into Earth's inner gravity well, Dr. Okafor activated the Genesis device. Reality hiccuped. For a moment that lasted eternity, the laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolute rules. In that instant of cosmic uncertainty, the space around Earth transformed into something that had never existed before, a region where matter and energy danced to equations written by human imagination. Rather than natural law, the hegemony bioships, evolved over millions of years to survive in normal spacetime, found themselves in an environment where their biological adaptations became liabilities. Their living hulls began to dissolve as the modified physics convinced their cellular structures that they were incompatible with existence. Weapon symbiotes that had fed on stellar matter for eons suddenly found themselves unable to process energy. That now followed entirely different conservation laws. The world eater lasted longest, its massive biomass and adaptive systems fighting against the changed physics. But even it could not survive in a universe where humanity had quietly rewritten the rules of existence itself. HFY's final transmission was barely coherent as his ship's bioneural networks collapsed. "Impossible. What are they? They've changed the very fabric of." The world eater imploded, its biomass compressed into a sphere of impossible density before expanding again as something that was no longer quite alive and not quite dead, a new form of matter that existed only because humans had decided it. Should Captain Santos watch the last of the hegemony fleet dissolve into component atoms? But her victory felt hollow. The Genesis device had worked, but at a cost that wouldn't be fully understood for generations. Earth now existed in a bubble of altered physics, cut off from the rest of the universe by barriers of humanity's own making. They had won, but in doing so, they had made themselves something other than human. The question now was whether what they had become was an improvement or a tragedy. The final battle was over, but the real consequences were just beginning. 3 months after the Battle of Sol, Captain Elena Santos stood on the observation deck of Earth Station Alpha, watching the planet slowly heal from wounds that had never been physical. The Genesis device's effects were still rippling through local spacetime, creating phenomena that required entirely new branches of physics to explain. Earth itself appeared unchanged. From this distance, blue oceans, white clouds, familiar continental outlines, but appearances were deceiving. The planet now existed in a pocket of altered reality, where the fundamental constants had been adjusted by human will rather than cosmic accident. Light moved at a different speed here. Gravity followed modified equations. Even time itself flowed, according to rules that humanity had written in desperation and sealed with the blood of both species. "Status report, Dr. Okafor," Santos requested as the physicist approached, her face bearing the weight of knowledge that had cost worlds to acquire. "The boundary is stable," Okafor replied, gesturing toward the invisible wall that now separated Sol system from the rest of the galaxy. "Nothing gets in without our permission, and nothing gets out without us actively allowing it. We're effectively quarantined from the universe at large through the observation port." They could see the cleanup efforts continuing. What remained of Luna was being reassembled by automated systems. But the new moon would be different, part natural satellite, part artificial construct, and part something that existed in the spaces between those definitions. The debris field where the hegemony fleet had died was being carefully cataloged, each fragment of alien biotechnology studied and stored for analysis. Director Volkov's voice came over the station's communication system. "All senior staff to Conference Room 7. We have visitors." Santos and Okafor exchanged glances. Visitors meant contact from outside the Genesis barrier, something that should have been impossible. The conference room's main display showed a sight that stopped conversation cold, hanging in space beyond. The barrier was a ship unlike anything in human or hegemony design. It was crystalline, almost jewel-like, its faceted hull refracting light in patterns that suggested mathematics made visible. and it was old so ancient that its hull carried the gravitational signatures of stars that had died before it formed. They appeared 6 hours ago, Volkov explained to the assembled officers. No fold space transition, no dimensional rifts. They were simply there, as if they'd been waiting. The crystalline ship's transmission came not through conventional radio, but as patterns of meaning that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to consciousness. Greetings, children of Terra. We are the architects. We have been watching your species with great interest. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now promoted to Director of Xenological Studies, leaned forward. The transmission is being received by every human consciousness simultaneously. It's not technology, it's direct mental contact on a species-wide level. You have done something remarkable, the transmission continued. In your desperation, you discovered what we learned millions of years ago, that reality is not fixed, but malleable. That consciousness, sufficiently focused and determined, can rewrite the rules that govern existence itself. Santos found herself speaking for all of humanity. Who are you? What do you want? We are what remains of the first species to achieve what you have achieved. Long ago, we'd have faced extinction. We'd have chose to change the universe rather than allow the universe to change us. We survived, but at a cost. We became something other than what we were. Images flooded their minds, visions of civilizations that had transcended physical existence, species that had rewritten themselves into pure energy, entire galaxies where the laws of physics were works of art rather than natural phenomena. The hegemony was not the first threat your species will face, nor will it be the last. The universe is filled with species that view existence as a zero-sum game, that believe survival requires the destruction of all potential competitors. But there is another path. What path? Volkov asked. The path we offer to all species that prove themselves capable of growth. You have demonstrated the three qualities necessary for transcendence: the wisdom to recognize existential threat, the courage to risk everything in response, and the creativity to find solutions that your enemies cannot imagine. You have earned the right to choose your next evolutionary step. The crystalline ship began to change, its faceted surface flowing like liquid while maintaining perfect geometric precision. It was becoming something new, adapting itself in real time, to serve as a bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. We offer you knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 species that chose growth over stagnation. We offer you power, the ability to reshape not just your local physics, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. And we offer you purpose, a place in the community of transcendent species that guide younger civilizations toward their own evolutionary leaps. Captain Santos looked around the room at her fellow humans, scarred veterans of a war that had forced them to become something unprecedented. They had started as a single species on a single world, and in the space of a few desperate years, they had become the authors of their own physics. What's the cost? She asked. Because humans had learned that everything worthwhile had a price. The cost is what you have already paid. You are no longer the species that first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. You have become something new, not quite human as your ancestors understood the term, but not yet fully transcendent either. You exist in the space between, and that is precisely where the most interesting evolution occurs. The mental contact intensified, and suddenly every human alive could see what the architects were offering. Visions of galaxies where entire star systems were works of engineering art, where species had overcome not just death, but meaninglessness itself, where the universe had been transformed from a hostile void into a garden of infinite possibility. But they could also see the price. Humanity would have to abandon not just Earth, but the very concept of being bound to a single world or even a single form of existence. They would become gardeners of reality itself, helping younger species navigate the same challenges they had faced. Dr. Okafor spoke for the scientists. The knowledge alone would be worth any price. To understand how reality truly works, to see the universe as it actually is rather than how our limited senses perceive it. But we'd stop being human, someone objected. We stopped being human the moment we decided to rewrite physics rather than surrender, Santos replied quietly. The question is, what do we become instead? The debate that followed would reshape humanity's future, but the outcome was never really in doubt. They were a species that had looked into the abyss of extinction and decided to install better lighting. When offered the choice between comfortable stagnation and terrifying growth, they had always chosen growth. 3 days later, The first human volunteers entered the architect ship. To begin the process of transcendence, they would return eventually as something unprecedented, human in memory and values, but cosmic in scope and capability. Earth itself would remain, protected by the Genesis barrier and serving as a memorial to what humanity had been. But humanity itself would spread throughout the galaxy and beyond, carrying the lesson they had learned in their darkest hour, that the universe belonged not to the strong or the ruthless, but to those creative enough to change the rules of the game itself. In the end, the hegemony's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human weapons or tactics. It had been assuming that survival was about who could destroy their enemies most efficiently. Humanity had proven that sometimes the best way to win was to make victory and defeat meaningless. By transforming the entire nature of the conflict, they had faced annihilation and responded by becoming the kind of species that could prevent such conflicts from ever happening again. The stars themselves seemed to approve, their light bending around the Genesis barrier in patterns that looked almost like applause. Humanity had passed its first test as a cosmic species. The real adventure was just beginning.